She was photographed in a white cap and oversized glasses, stepping out of a vehicle outside a luxury chalet in the Austrian Alps, and the only thing that gave her away was her hair, the unmistakable red. The deliberate attempt to be unrecognizable that was defeated by the one thing she cannot change about how she looks. It is a small detail, and yet it captures something essential about the situation Sarah Ferguson is currently in. The effort to be invisible, the failure of that effort, and the continued presence of the thing that makes her recognizable regardless of how carefully she manages everything else around it. The question that the Austrian photographs generated, and that has been circulating persistently since they emerged, is the obvious one. How is she paying for it? The Meyer Life Medical Health Resort near Salzburg is not a modest retreat. It is a high-end facility known for attracting wealthy international guests who value privacy as much as the quality of the treatments. Reports suggest the chalet costs around £2,000 per night. £14,000 a week. For an extended stay in a period when her 6 businesses have been dissolved, her charitable patronages have been severed, her commercial income has contracted to levels that the available public information does not explain as sufficient to sustain this lifestyle. The financial question is real and legitimate and has been raised by credible commentators, including Tom Sykes in the Daily Beast, who said directly that the idea she was funding the Austrian break from her own pocket strained credulity. But alongside the financial question, and in some ways more revealing than it, is a different question that gets asked less often and that points towards something more structural about the situation. Why is she staying there, not in the logistical sense of who is paying and through what arrangement? In the psychological sense, reports from people close to her describe someone who has no intention of scaling down to what they describe as ordinary living. Who feels, after everything she has been through, that maintaining a high standard of living is justified. Who views the Alpine retreat not primarily as an extravagance, but as a necessary component of coping, as a form of wellness maintenance that the difficulty of her current circumstances requires rather than contradicts. That framing the luxury as therapeutic necessity, the high standard as justified by suffering rather than as something requiring justification by income, is the specific psychological dynamic that has characterized Sarah Ferguson's relationship with money and with material comfort throughout her public life. And understanding it is more important than understanding any specific financial arrangement, because it is the thing that produces the financial arrangements rather than simply coexisting with them. When she was inside the royal family, the gap between what she wanted and what she could personally afford was filled by the institutional machinery around her. The spending continued at whatever level it reached because the safety net was always there. When that safety net was withdrawn following the divorce, it was not replaced by a genuine reckoning with the relationship between income and expenditure. It was replaced by a series of alternative mechanisms: commercial deals, wealthy friends, Gulf connections, the specific informal economy of hospitality, and support that the name Ferguson, attached to the former wife of a royal duke, could generate in certain international circles. Each mechanism resolved the immediate crisis without touching the underlying assumption. The assumption that the standard of living she had internalized as normal was not something she was required to bring into alignment with her actual resources. It was something the world owed her, and the world in various forms and through various channels kept paying. The key phrase from the reports is this: she reportedly feels that after everything she has been through, maintaining a high standard of living is justified. After everything she has been through. That framing positions the luxury not as something she can afford, but as something she deserves. Not as a financial decision, but as a moral claim. And moral claims, in the interior logic of someone who has internalized them deeply enough, are not subject to the ordinary constraints of arithmetic. You do not negotiate with what you are owed. You find the means to receive it. This is the psychological pattern that explains every phase of the financial story. Not greed in the simple sense. Not recklessness in the sense of not knowing that the spending was unsustainable. Something more specific and more complicated. The conviction, deeply embedded and apparently immune to the kind of corrective feedback that genuine financial reckoning provides, that the standard of living she was living at was the appropriate one for someone of her position, her history, her specific combination of suffering and resilience. That adjusting that standard downward was not a financial correction but a personal injustice. The confidence that sources describe, the belief that opportunities in motion will more than cover the expenses being accumulated, fits the same pattern. It is not irrational optimism in a simple sense. There are real possibilities. The documentary bidding process, the memoir negotiations, the potential interview deal. These are real commercial opportunities, not invented fantasies, and some version of one of them may materialize in a form that generates significant income. But the confidence that they will is carrying more weight than any realistic assessment of the publishing market's current appetite for a Sarah Ferguson tell-all would justify. Publishers were, by multiple accounts, hesitant. The American streaming market, where the largest figures were reportedly being discussed, is the same market she is apparently reluctant to engage with directly because of the legal and investigative pressure in the United States around the Epstein story. The opportunity she is counting on to resolve the financial situation she is currently accumulating is the same opportunity she is structurally prevented from fully pursuing because of the circumstances that created the financial situation in the first place. That circularity is the specific form in which the pattern has always expressed itself. The solution that is always just around the corner. The deal that will change everything. The next project that will finally produce the stability that the previous project was supposed to produce. Each iteration of the promise genuine enough to be credible, each iteration of the reality insufficient to break the cycle, each new version of the crisis arriving with enough similarity to the previous version to be recognizable as the same problem, but with enough new wrapping to allow it to be experienced as a fresh emergency rather than a continuing one. The daughters are the wild card in the current iteration. Beatrice and Eugenie are, by accounts from people close to the family, genuinely concerned. Not just emotionally concerned, in the diffuse way of daughters who worry about a mother under pressure. Specifically concerned, practically concerned, in ways that have apparently produced specific conversations and specific advice. They are urging her to reduce her spending, to face the financial reality more directly, to make the adjustments that the situation requires rather than the adjustments that it will eventually force regardless of her preferences. There is concern, according to those reports, that if the current trajectory continues, they could find themselves in a position where they feel obligated to intervene financially, which would create obligations they have not budgeted for and dependencies they have actively worked to avoid. The irony of that position, two daughters who have spent years carefully building financial and professional independence, specifically to avoid being drawn into their parents' financial vortex, potentially being drawn into it anyway by the force of maternal need and familial loyalty, is not lost on the people observing the situation closely. Beatrice and Eugenie have done the work of independence. They have jobs. They have careers. They have mortgages and children and financial lives built on their own professional activity rather than on the royal adjacency that has sustained their parents. The specific care with which they have constructed that independence is visible in every professional decision they have made as adults. And the possibility that their mother's continued inability to match lifestyle to income might eventually consume some of the resources of that independence, through the obligation of support or through the reputational cost of continued association with someone whose financial arrangements keep generating uncomfortable questions, is the specific risk they are apparently trying to counsel against. Andrew is, by the reports, not part of the financial equation. His own situation, criminal investigation, Marsh Farm, the dramatically reduced circumstances of his post-Royal Lodge existence, leaves him without the capacity to provide the kind of support that would be necessary to sustain her current level of spending, even if he were willing to provide it. The unusual post-divorce domestic arrangement that kept both of them at Royal Lodge, and that provided her with a form of continued royal adjacency and practical stability that her own resources could not have sustained independently, is gone. Whatever informal understanding existed between them about costs and support is no longer operative in the same form. She is, as the reports describe it, navigating this on her own. That novelty, navigating it on her own, may be the most significant feature of the current situation. Because the pattern that has characterized her financial life across 40 years has always had a next layer of support available. Someone to fill the gap. Some mechanism to resolve the immediate crisis. Some arrangement that allowed the lifestyle to continue while the underlying problem was deferred to a future moment. The question the current situation raises, in a more acute form than any previous crisis has raised it, is whether that next layer is still there. Whether the network of wealthy friends and Gulf connections and informal hospitality that has sustained her through previous cycles has sufficient depth to sustain this one, given the specific additional weight that the Epstein file revelations have placed on any association with her name. The white cap and the oversized glasses and the red hair visible at the edge of the chalet entrance are the image of someone trying to manage that question by staying out of sight. By keeping the profile low enough that the exposure of the arrangement is delayed. By preserving the space in which the next opportunity might materialize before the current arrangement runs out. The cameras found her anyway. They always do. And the question of what happens when the space between the current arrangement and the next opportunity closes, when the tide that one insider described as rising faster than she can stay afloat catches up with the confidence that it will not, is the question that the Austrian photographs have made impossible to avoid. She has been in this position before. She has been written off before. She has surprised people before. Those who know her well consistently note the specific quality of her resilience, not a performed optimism, but a genuine refusal to accept that the current bad chapter is the final one. She has built second acts from worse positions than this one, and has done it through the specific combination of warmth and charisma and media savvy that has always been her most reliable commercial asset. But the asset is complicated in ways it has never been complicated before. The documentary record of the Epstein communications is not going to unexist. The charitable organizations that ended their connections are not going to reverse those decisions absent a development that would have to be considerably more significant than anything currently on the horizon. The public's understanding of what the private correspondence looked like, measured against the public statements she made about the same relationship, is not going to reset. The specific form of the reputational damage this time is different from previous forms because it is documented, and documentation is considerably harder to manage than allegation. The luxury chalet in the Austrian Alps continues. The champagne and the room service and the spa treatments and the occasional discreet slope outings. The confidence that it will all be resolved by the next deal. The daughter's urging caution that is apparently not being fully heeded. The credit accumulating against a projected income that may or may not materialize in the form required to clear it. It is a picture that is, in its specific texture, exactly as intriguing as the mystery of her whereabouts that preceded the photographs. Not because anything dramatic is about to happen, but because it illustrates, with the specific clarity that only a really well-chosen detail can produce, the central and so far unresolved question of Sarah Ferguson's entire public life. How long can the pattern sustain itself before the next version of the reckoning it has always eventually produced arrives? And is this the version that finally produces something different from what all the previous versions produced? The tide, as the insider described it, keeps rising. She keeps staying afloat. For now, the chalet is comfortable. And the red hair, despite the cap and the glasses, remains visible from a distance.